Dear brothers and sisters, it's lovely to have this opportunity to speak with you today. I want to tell you a story. It's a true story. It's the story of George Ernest Hunter. I knew George as a little girl. I was probably between the ages of 5 and 7. I remembered, because you'll struggle with this, I was a bit of a shy girl at that age, and I remembered being a little bit frightened that I was being taken to this house to meet this very important person, or at least he was to church members, and they wanted me to meet him. Well, George was born in the year 1883 in London. A few months after his birth, he was taken to St. John the Evangelist Church and was baptised. You may wonder why, but in those days it was believed that anyone who wasn't baptised, and that included babies, if they died, they would go to hell. And so children were baptised as young children, as babies. At some point after that, George's family moved to Warwick. For by 1891, that is where they are living. George, his parents, and his older brother. In the following years, they meet the missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in 1897, George's parents, his brother, and himself are baptised. There are more in the family by now. In fact, they had 10 children. 5 lived and 5 passed away. By 1901, they have moved to Leamington. They probably moved around a lot because labourers tended to. There were many labourers, and so I suppose you moved where you could find it. Their time in Leamington, George met his wife Ada, and they were married in 1903. In 1907, they had their first child, a son. And by 1911, they have moved to Coventry. And this is why I met George, because he was a member of Coventry Ward. Well, it wouldn't have been a ward then, I don't know what they called them then. There was no chapel still. We still didn't have chapels. It was rented rooms, rented houses, or even church members' homes, and I wonder if that's what it was. I don't know. The story has not been told. During this time, they gave birth to another child, a daughter, and they only had those 2 children. Those 2 children have since passed away. Their son had no children, and their daughter had 1 daughter. During this time, George would go to Gosford Green, and I wondered what he stood on, because I can remember the missionaries when I was a teenager standing on a wall in Coventry Precinct sharing the gospel, and that was what George did. I think there was a difference though, because when George preached the gospel, they threw stones at him, and in 1922 he was tarred and feathered. Isabel shared a memory. She said, I remember George sharing that story with me. And she said that he said it never stopped him. He still continued to share the gospel. George went to the temple in 1958, 2 months after it was dedicated, to receive his own endowment. In 1967, George Ernest Hunter passed away at the age of 84. He died while the Coventry Chapel was still under construction. He never saw Spencer W. Kimball come to dedicate that building. A year after his death in 1968, two members went to the London Temple and sealed George and Ada for time and all eternity. In 1981, in the Logan Temple, George was sealed to his parents. And remember, his parents joined the church in 1897. But while they were alive, there was not a temple in Great Britain. And so none of their work was able to be done while they were living. George is still not sealed to his children. In fact, his daughter is not even in family search. So until someone does their tree, or until a living relative requests that work to be done, it will not be done, because you or I cannot do work for those who are not our family. But I want to just say thank you. I want to say thank you to those who keep LDS church records, and that's how I knew when he was baptised, endowed, and has been sealed at different points. I want to say thank you to those who have recorded, have scanned them, and those who have indexed these records so that the information that I have given you today is truth. Those who took pictures, because I have pictures of all of the streets that George lived in over his life up until his death. So thank you. And so now I want to give you a challenge. And this is not my challenge. At last General Conference, President Nelson asked us during this time to do some family history. And if you haven't done any, you've still got some time. You can add a photo. It can be a photo of yourself that your great-great-grandchildren will appreciate. You could add a story, record a story, and let them hear your voice of perhaps your experiences or some of the great things that you have done, or even the terrible things that you have done during lockdown. Perhaps you could do some indexing, because indexing blesses all of our lives. But when a prophet asks us to do something, there is always a promise. And the promise has been that you will hear him. I want to bear my testimony to you that I have heard him. I have heard him in my tree, as I've needed evidence to prove that someone belongs to my family. I have heard him when I couldn't read the writing in indexing because it was far too wavy. And then all of a sudden, it's as though the writing has changed and I've been able to recognise the name. I have heard him in my personal life. This has not been a great experience. I have missed my family, my friends. I have missed going to the Family History Centre to help others. And I have struggled with being completely locked in a house, which many years ago a doctor told me was really not good for my depression. And it hasn't been. And I have heard him constantly encouraging me to go for a walk, to phone someone, and to do things to keep me busy. I've been learning French. I've put 6 decades of photos, or most of them, into scrapbooks. So I bear my testimony that if you do a little bit of family history during this lockdown, that you will hear him. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.